And the topic for today is just pretty much pairing with your agency owner to be able to grow, and then also how you balance that time. Some of it might seem like a little bit of a biography, but I think a lot of the key points that I learned along the way have helped transition to getting to where we want to be. So I think a big thing is it all starts with open communication, getting your real goals out. Your agency owner can't help you if they don't truly know what you want. And for me personally, it may sound like a shock, but if I look at my realistic, desires, I don't like sales. I just know that it's a vehicle that's going to get me where I want to be in life. And I told Justin very early on that I wanted to be where he was as an agency owner. I knew that the reason I was coming here was not to be a sales professional. My goal right away was to become an agency owner. And in order to get there, I knew that I had to be successful in sales. I needed accolades. I needed to be able to prove that I was successful and I knew what I was talking about, because you have no credibility trying to show someone how to write an eagle if you've never written one yourself. So because of this, my first phase was just diving into sales. I came from a car industry where I was working from 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. every single 6 days a week, every holiday, every weekend. And I told Justin early on that my goal was to never work weekends and never work nights. That was my goal. And had I not been open and upfront with him, I think there could have been conflicts, especially when you're talking about when I came in, I was pretty much the only business to business person. The philosophy was residential. You have to work Saturdays. You have to work nights. And that it wasn't what I was going to do, because I had, for the past decade, I have given that up. So for me, I needed to find a way to do it Monday through Friday from 8:30 to 5. And in order for me to hit my goals, I also had to make the sacrifice that I was making every single train more, with the goal of I needed to write an eagle every single train more to be able to build that, because during the week you're going to have different distractions and everything. So it was a priority that I needed to be on those. And I was actually able to write an eagle every single train more except for one my first year. So, and it allowed me to have that open communication with Justin, allowed me to be flexible with the schedule and be on the same page, to where I was able to finally take those weekends and nights with my family and develop game plans through that. So my first year was really just, what do I need to do to be successful? Some of that meant, I kid you not, I filled 4 notebooks full of writing out my sales talk my first 2 weeks. And it wasn't something that I wanted to. I had 5 families protected my very first day, and I still spent 2 hours at night writing out my objections and rebuttals. You know, it's not something that I wanted to do, but it was the commitment to where I was going. Because yeah, you can have a great day once, but to replicate it, I knew that I needed to continue that mindset. I couldn't just be a student until I was in the field. I needed to be a student continuously. So that was what my mindset going into the first phase of my career was. It's just, I had to remind myself every day, my first 3 months, Aaron, you're paying your dues. Just pay your dues. And I had to remind myself that, because there was a lot of times where I didn't want to go business to business or walk into certain businesses. For example, there was plenty of times where I didn't want to go into a certain type of business because either they looked busy or I knew I was going to get the corporate objection. But I had the mindset of, well, there's going to be a time where I'm needing to teach somebody how to deal with a corporate objection, and how do I know how to do that unless I experience it? So it was one of those where, hey, first phase, I'm going to get as comfortable and fail as often as I can with the mindset of failing forward. Phase 2, once I was producing consistently, Justin and I sat down and spoke about what it takes to grow a team. My biggest fear in recruiting is, I hope I'm not throwing shade at anybody, but I didn't want to be the essential oils or the Herbalife person that was constantly trying to get people to join their business strategy. And I knew that I needed to recruit but because I was able to express those concerns on how to avoid being the Mal Luca type person with Justin, I was able to develop a strategy to be able to come across as genuine and how to do it in a manner. And it helped me realize, that even though we were recruiting everyone, I wasn't trying to bring on anyone. So because of this, I was able to develop on who I was looking for, what I was looking for in person, people that I wanted to build my business with. And I started recruiting in my free time when I was out with friends and family. I didn't do much of the Facebook posting because that was one of the biggest things where I've unfriended people because all I ever see on their business is something about what they're doing. And I didn't want to be that person. Now, fast forward years later, we've realized there's got to be a balance, right? If you're not using the tools that you have available, then you're just doing yourself a disservice. But at that time, it was focused on, being with friends and family. And because of the success I had so far, it gave me credibility. And I'm a firm believer of it's hard to pitch a dream when you're living a nightmare. And people could see the differences. They could really see the transitions that I had made from how much I was sacrificing being in the car industry, my holidays, weekends, nights. They could see the differences, the freedom, the flexibility, the success, just the lack of stress. I went from going to an atmosphere that I truly dreaded because everybody wanted you to be a failure, because if you succeeded, it meant that they were failing, to an atmosphere where everybody was uplifting. And because they could see the differences, when you're successful, it draws the right people to you. And from there, one of the biggest things I wish I would have recruited sooner. Amber Winfrey talks all the time about how she beat my time period to get to regional director, and she's done a phenomenal job, and I've learned so much from her. And one of the biggest things is she recruited right away. When she was ready to get going, she dove in because it was her goal to get there. And I wish I would have done that sooner. When I wrote my first Eagle, that was my first week. I could have talked to people about, hey, let me show you how to make $6,000, $7,000 your first week. That was credibility, and I didn't do that right away. So when I was diving into training, and I don't know if any of you guys have ever experienced this, but my biggest fear was sacrificing personal sales while training. But I also knew that it was essential. And I had seen so many people in Transparent up to that point who wanted teams, but they wouldn't make the upfront risk or sacrifice to grow. And because of this, they were in a constant circle of trying to build, but not giving their people enough time in order to have them be successful, which led to them just being alone, And so because of that, I sat down with Justin, and him and I just talked about my concerns of, and gosh, I'm going to take a hit, or how do I not take a hit, but be able to be successful in helping develop people. And because of that, I was able to come up with a couple different rule of thumbs and be able to develop a strategy where I was spending 2 to 3 days with people their first week, but also making sure that I got on the board. So my first rule of thumb was to just get these people to 2,500 their first few days. Anything above that was either split, depending on their effort. And this allowed me to pour into the people who came in and did everything they were asked to do above and beyond. But also it made sure that I wasn't wasting my time and giving away everything with people that were just doing the bare minimum, And it's sad to say, but I mean, it just doesn't make sense to give 10,000 in premiums away to somebody that doesn't know their approaches by their 4th day, somebody that's cutting out early, somebody that's not studying their sales talk. And that was where I realized that sometimes it's not on me as a trainer. Sometimes, as long as I'm doing what's necessary, there's going to be people that follow through with what they say, and there's also going to be people that don't. So it allowed me to not take it personal either when someone failed, as long as I was doing my best. My rule of thumb number 2 with training is, if someone has 2 0 days, if they're putting in the work, no matter what my schedule was planned, I need to go work with them in their territory. And you reward them by putting in the effort. You reward them by going with them in their territory and gifting or splitting business. But if someone has 2 0 days and they're not putting in the work, well, you can still spend time with them. The difference is they come follow you, and you're not splitting or gifting business because they're with you in your territory. That's your time to be able to hit your goals, but you're able to still let them see what they need to see. And again, it's very fluid. There's going to be times where people are flipping between the 2 categories, but those rule of thumbs help me keep a baseline as to how to split that time and where it was needed to be given. One of the biggest fears, and the reason I'm such a big believer of pour into your people, is I gave away over $60,000 in premiums my second year. But in doing so, my team went from $354,000 all the way up to $1.2 million. So I would say that it was worth it. I also hired a caller to set up interviews. I've rarely, whenever I followed Justin or shadowed him, I didn't see him wasting his time with minute things, right? Like, so I knew that I needed to hire a caller. That way I could dive into interviews. And it was a struggle to be able to balance time at first, because everyone spoke on splitting time in the company to, how to recruit and then go work. However, with the company being mostly residential at that time, the recommended schedule was call from 9 to noon and then work from noon to 9. But I was on a B2B schedule. Businesses close at 5. So I had to be fluid with my schedule. And I had to understand that there wasn't going to be a perfect schedule. I probably spent 2 months asking everybody how they split their time. And it helped me realize there's no such thing as a perfect schedule when you're trying to grow. I had to be fluid. So I ran interviews in the car between demos. I ran interviews on weekends, at nights. If I wasn't on the, or if I wasn't on the board, or if I was on the board and hitting my personal goals, I could spend a weekday at the end of the week doing interviews or working with my caller to help get them better to set up more quality interviews. There's been different schedules I've been on. Again, there's been times where I'm selling Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or working with people in the field. Again, if they're getting 0 days and they're doing the work, then I've sacrificed a personal selling day to go work with them. And then Tuesday, Thursdays were interviews. But I've also done differences to where right now I'm getting back in the swing of things where I need to sell from 9 to 2, interviews from 2 to 6. So it's not always about schedule. Sometimes you have to look at it through the lens of what does your business need you to do? Because there's different things you have to do at different times, and you have to be flexible to be able to accommodate where your business is in. And that's where I had to, even though there's been times where I had a plan, there's been times where Justin would say, Aaron, I need you to go train this person that we just brought on board. So communication is key, because one of the biggest things that I did very early on and I had to learn was I had to make sure that my wife, Amber, knew what my goals were. Because if I would just up and leave to go to Wisconsin or Illinois or something to train somebody, but she didn't understand why I was doing it in the early stages, that could have been an issue. But I needed to, in order for my team to grow, I needed to be flexible in those early phases. But communication is what allowed me to get there. So it was open communication with Justin and open communication with Amber as well, to make sure that we were all on the same page, to prevent any small hiccups. Phase 3 was when I started getting into my own office and building my team leaders. I realized that's a lot of work to be a regional director if you have to do everything yourself. And I didn't do this very well up front. I was used to being the person that was just doing everything, train everybody, sell, and your team can only get to a point unless you're developing your people and helping them move up the career track as well. So because of this, I got to a point where I spent 2 quarters recruiting. I had to stop selling to be able to build and get people on the teams of my trainers to build their team. But it's always fluid. There's been multiple times where I had to stop focusing on recruiting and get back into this field and lead from the front with sales. So your actions need to be, instead of what does a schedule look like, your actions need to be based off of the question, what does my team need versus what do I want to do? And it's a process. It's always ever changing, but keeping open and honest with Justin, even if I don't want to, there's a lot of times where I've had conversations with Justin, but being humble and having humility have allowed me to have real conversations. For example, when I took 2 quarters off to focus on recruiting, but then I realized that I needed to get back into the field and sell to be able to help train and develop, there was some fears of going from recruiting back to cold calling. And that was a conversation that I didn't necessarily want to have. There's that pride factor. But in having those conversations, it allowed me to get past that and address those fears with Justin to be able to develop it. So allowing yourself some humility. And that's kind of the follow through as to how I've transitioned. And I would love to open up some questions, but some of the key takeaways just from walking through this is, guys, it's a process. You should focus on progress, not perfection, because you're going to make mistakes. Allow yourself to fail forward. I lost the first 8 people I trained, and it was very easy for me to get down on myself. I remember sitting with Justin at the end of my first year when I got promoted to market director. It took $125,000 in premiums to hit market director. I accounted up to $93,000 of that personally that quarter. And I remember talking with Justin, it's like, man, this is a lot of work. Is it even worth it? And I had to have those conversations, and I had to understand that it's a process. You're going to fail. You're going to make mistakes. But I had to understand that I was just getting better. And it's only a phase, right? It doesn't last forever. I went through 8 people, but then I found 4 people that stuck and I was able to link arms with. The second takeaway is just communication is key. Sometimes we need to open up on things. Everybody's had a conversation with their direct manager or their AO, and they'll ask you a question, and there's always the answer we want to give, but sometimes we need to give the answer that we don't want to give because it's allowing you to move forward. And you also need to have those conversations and be upfront with your spouse too, because you guys you're going as a team. It's your success is highly dependent on the support system you have around you. So it's easy to talk about goals with people in the business, but you also should be relating those with the people around you, whether it's kids or spouses, because if your business needs you to go 2 states away to train, but you haven't talked about why that's important with your family, there's going to be some issues. And then the first priority that you have is you have to be successful in sales yourself. Go write an Eagle. Get an award for being in the top 50 of sales. And sometimes it's going to take you to go shadow somebody, to learn something different. Make the sacrifice up front. The next bullet point or takeaway is just dive into recruiting. Personal and field recruiting. Get a paid caller, because it allows you to focus your energy and your time on the bigger things like training, selling, and interviews versus spending hours of your time phoning. And you have to be flexible. Like I said, I realized early on that there's never going to be a perfect schedule. Build your schedule based off of what your team needs versus just what you want. So those are a couple of the takeaways, and if anybody has questions, we can open it up.
Yeah, let me ask a couple questions that came in. Aaron, this is fantastic. I see a lot of nodding heads and a lot of thumbs up, so thank you for that. Couple questions that came up. First, Paul Leahy had asked, you talked about all the things that you did for a great start, from failing forward to writing out your sales talk and objections, but what else would you share with new agents to have a great start?
Yeah, so I can just give you the process as to how I started. My first week was on a train mower. I remember I quit my prior job the Tuesday before. We didn't necessarily have a sales school for business to business. I ended up going to the main office with Justin Thursday and Friday just to read through a sales talk. And I remember a guy in sales school who had done B2B sales trying to tell me, oh, you don't need to know the exact words. It's just make an impression. And he wasn't really learning the words. And I remember I had to just isolate myself. Basically what I did, I didn't have a sales school. So I spent 2 days in the office writing out my sales talk. I would put headphones on and I would record myself saying it. And I had to speak slow, because when you're reading something off paper, you can go fast, but then when you listen to it, your words move way too quick for you to be able to process it. So I had to speak really slow when I was recording it. That way I could recite it with it. And when it started, I'd be talking just behind the recording. Then when I was talking with the recording, it meant that I was starting to get it down. And when I was talking ahead of the recording, it meant that I had it down where I could move on to the next piece. And I probably spent 12, 14 hours those 2 days in the office just focusing on memorizing. And then I also barricaded myself in a room that weekend doing the same thing, because I knew in order for me to have the week I wanted on Monday, trust me, I wanted to spend a weekend. It was my first weekend off work in 10 years. So it was very tempting to go out. It was finally getting nice, but I told my wife I needed to be able to do those things. And then my first week was on a train mower. And I remember Justin did the good old trick of, we were supposed to meet my first day at 8 a.m. in my territory. And he texted me saying, oh, Aaron, I'm running late. Why don't you get started? And I knew what it was. He was testing me to see was I going to be the person that sat in their car reading their sales talk, or was I going to be the person that had a stack of calls and demos to show them when he got there? And I wanted to just sit in the car. There was a lot of nerves, but I knew I needed to get started. And so I got started. And that whole week I was just a sponge. If you ever see like a 5-year-old and they're asking a million questions, that's who I was. I remember it got to Thursday and I'm still writing out my sales talk. I'm sitting over 15,000 for the week by Thursday. And I finally walk into a room and a couple of people are having beers at about 8 o'clock at night. And they hit them. They're like, oh my gosh, you drink? I'm like, well, yeah, my goals are hit, but not until my goals were hit. It was just making those small sacrifices to just do everything that you can. And I had to keep asking myself, Aaron, what do I need to be doing right now to get where I want? That was the only question I asked myself my first 3 months.
That's awesome. We've got a ton of questions that are rolling in here, so let's make this. We'll do this rapid fire question. First question for you is you talked about paid callers. Really quick, what do your paid callers do for you? What do they do for you? And then secondly on that, how do you know what to pay them and when to get them in your career?
Absolutely. So I got pretty lucky early on. My wife was only making about $28,000 a year as a nanny. They were nice people, but it was just a bad situation. She hated going to work. And I realized, well, if she's only making $29,000, why don't I have her come on board and help me build the business? So my wife was my paid caller, and by paid, I actually just put team members underneath her so she could build a residual income. Now that's not necessarily the case. And realistically, what I've learned is you only need to pay somebody your state wages, whether it's 10 or 15 bucks an hour, and you don't have to pay them 8 hours. I mean, if you know that there's a kid in your neighborhood or a person that's looking for extra work, you can pay them 15 hours a week just to get some interviews set up. And it's going to allow you, think of it, if you only pay somebody 10 hours, that's still 10 hours that you can spend somewhere else. And it's going to depend by every state. Because if I said $10 an hour and you're sitting in California, that might seem like peanuts, right? So it all depends on what your state rates are. And it's okay to start somebody lower, and as they're setting up interviews, then give them a little bit extra. Because I guarantee you, yes, it looks like an expense up front, but once you start seeing the results, then it seems like a great expense.
Man, I've got a bunch of questions I want to run by you personally. We're right at 9:30, but I do want to get to Carolina's question. She asked, how did you find the best way to overcome corporate objections?
Yeah, that was probably the most frustrating time. I was on a roll. I was writing quite a bit of business, and I had just finished a town, and I knew my next goal was to learn how to deal with corporate. So I did what I didn't want to do in my next territory. I picked specifically because most of the businesses in that town were corporate, and I just dove in. I spent 3 weeks barely writing business just to learn and get better at the corporate objection. And nobody had an answer yet. So it was literally throw enough stuff at the wall and see if it sticks. And I remember beating my head over and over trying to get past a corporate objection, but I knew that it was necessary. I knew that I needed to figure out how to get past it in order to train others, because in bigger towns, so I don't know many people, I mean, the successful folks, I know that they would probably do that, but I don't know many people that would just throw themselves and sacrifice personal sales to spend 3 weeks of getting their butt kicked to learn how to deal with the corporate objection. And now I've learned there's a variety of ways. One is if you're walking into a Walmart, you should talk about other Walmarts that you've talked to. You shouldn't be talking about Joe's Crab Shack next door, right? Or if a business owner or if the manager says something like, oh yeah, that's corporate, sometimes I empower them. Gosh, Dan, that's exactly why I wanted to catch up with you. You know, obviously with you being the manager here, you know more about what you can make decisions on with your store or what needs to go to corporate. So I just wanted to catch you for 5 minutes, show you what it is that we do and see if that's something that you're able to make the decision on. You got a minute? And all of that was found just by throwing stuff at the wall and seeing if it stuck. But I remember, man, there was days that I wanted to up and leave, but I knew that it was something that I needed to do in order to get to that next stage.